Hey everyone, happy Monday to you. It is Dr. Trevor. It's great to be with you back for another episode of Mindset Monday. So today on our Mindset Monday, we're going to focus in on what's called relational protection and relational connection. Okay, so how does this apply into mindset? Well, we want to think about this today is this framework that's helpful for us when we think about our relational health. So the mindset is to work towards balance where we can have both connection and protection. So let me just talk to you about what is this idea of like relational protection, relational connection. So in our relationships, we actually need both. We need to feel safe and we need to feel protected as we're able to do the relational work of connection. Before we talk about relationships specifically, let me just kind of zoom out a little bit and just help us kind of increase our awareness that we actually have this co-occurrence or this like dichotomy where we experience both and have this deep-seated like designed need for both. So let's think about protection for a second. Protection is this like immediate response that we have that we often know as like the fight or flight response. Whenever there is the threat or fear of danger, we immediately kick into protection mode, right? Why? Because we are designed with self-preservation in mind. And I'm so glad that we are. Like, could you imagine in a world where we didn't have that? Like, it wasn't designed and created into us, like in our beings and in our bodies. Right? Like creation, humanity would be extinct, right? We wouldn't exist, right? If we were hiking through the mountains and we came across a bear and that trigger didn't snap like for us and there was that immediate sense of fight or flight, that immediate sense of like inertia that happens, right? Where we recognize that there's the threat or fear of danger, right? That the bear's going to chase us or maul us or eat us or whatever's going to happen with that bear out on the trail, right? Like it's super significant that we have this deep-seated part of us that shows up with protection and self-preservation. Then there's this other part of us that has this deep-seated need for connection. Like that's all around us, whether it's at the foundational part, like a connection, like in some kind of like spiritual sense with our deity, like with God, or the connection with creation or our environment and the world around us, or as we're going to talk about today, this deep need to feel connected with key people in our lives. You know, if we're married, that might be our spouse. If we're in a committed relationship, that would be our partner. But it also includes like our family members, like our siblings. It includes our parents. It includes our extended families. It includes those that we are in friendships with, those that we live in community with, those that we work with. Right? There's this part of us that we have this deep desire for connection with other people. So these two ideas of protection and connection. So we've kind of established that we have this deep need for both, but we have this reality that they coexist, that they're both in us at the same time. So today when we talk about mindset, again, the mindset of balancing protection and connection is for us just to be able to have language and have some kind of framework to be able to say, okay, so how do we kind of navigate this dichotomy for protection and connection? Well, let me just explain a little bit more about that dynamics of the push and pull between protection and connection. You know, oftentimes in like relational work, we talk about this idea of boundaries, or sometimes referred to like walls. Like we have these like little bricks that we like lay, and when we feel unsafe, like we build these bricks that turn into building a wall, or it's like a fence, or some kind of barrier between us and someone else. And the reason we do that is for this need for preservation, this need for protection. So on the reverse of that, this idea of connection is our ability to think about that same analogy, the wall made of bricks. our ability to take off one brick at a time, right? To reduce and remove the barriers between us and someone else. So if this little wall that we're building and the bricks that we're putting up, we're constantly adding or subtracting these bricks to our wall. When we feel like we need to be more protected, we're putting another brick and another brick and another brick on that wall. And when that happens, it's limiting our ability to feel connected because we can't access or can't get to the other person on the other side of that. Okay, so the benefit of protection is we have this opportunity to kind of feel safe. We feel guarded, right? That's another way we talk about protection. We feel we put ourselves in a place, right, where we're kind of protecting our heart, or protecting our mind, or any other within our relationships. When we talk about boundaries in just a moment, I'll explain some more. But again, this other part of connection, right? We take down these bricks one at a time, so that we can we can kind of look over and wave to the person on the other side, or if we can keep kind of bringing down those bricks in our wall, we might step over into the space that they're in, or we might be able to invite them over into the space that we are in. Okay, so even though I'm talking about this idea of bricks in a wall, and it's something that's kind of concrete, and not meaning concrete the material, but concrete as a concept, we also recognize that our relational kind of push and pull between protection and connection can feel very abstract at times. And so again, I think having some kind of visual helps us recognize this balance between push and pull. Another way we might think about this that's helpful is protection. When I talked about guarded, protection is like when we might have our posture, like our fists up like this, right? Like if you were in a boxing ring and somebody was throwing punches at you, right? You'd put your guard up, wouldn't you? Right, and why do we put our guard up? We put our guard up to stop getting hit, or when we do get hit, it doesn't hurt so much, right? We're trying to protect our face and our body, right? That's why we put our guard up. Okay, now think about this, the posture of connection. If this is the posture of protection, right? The posture of connection is like the opposite. It's like opening up ourselves, right? It's like kind of being able to see and oftentimes even expose ourselves in a way that's like inviting and it's warm, right? So it's an invitation to other people and to be able to join us in a way that feels connecting for us. All right, so let's just talk about this idea of relational protection. So relational protection involves this settling boundaries. I talked about boundaries a few minutes ago, right? To safeguard our emotional and our mental time and attention. So there are very appropriate times for us to be able to set these boundaries. And there's actually lots of areas or categories in which we can set boundaries. So this idea of relational protection, our ability to set a boundary, it might be a boundary around our words, our physical bubble and space. It might be boundaries around emotionally kind of self-disclosing or divulging. It might be around things that aren't even inside of us. We set boundaries around our time and how much time we spend with somebody. We set boundaries around physical touch, if that's appropriate or inappropriate with somebody. We might set boundaries around the environment of where we meet people and how we interact with them when we meet there. We might set boundaries around our finances, right? If people are asking us for money, or we're asking to spend money or provide for someone else, we often set boundaries around property and possessions, around the things that as we may interact with other people, right? We might be able to set boundaries around what's appropriate for allowing them to use or borrow or have versus not, and what's the fine line in the midst of that. Boundaries are a super important part of our relationships. Within that, this idea of boundary work, I it's helpful for us to be able to ultimately feel like we can set those boundaries in a way that promotes safety for us. All right, let me give you just a couple of categories about maybe kind of the sequence of boundary setting. So the first is, when we think about boundaries, we need to be able to do some assessment, like right off the bat. And it's this idea of assessing, might I want or need a boundary? And the assessment there is really around this idea of like, does it feel safe? Does it not feel safe? If it doesn't feel safe, again, there's this assessment question, like, might I need to set a boundary here? So the second step in that, after we've assessed for a boundary, the second part is to be able to actually establish the boundary. The boundary is our ability to be able to like make a determination. Yes, I'm going to set a boundary, so that's the assessment part. And then it's the second part. Yes, I know where to put the boundary. Let's go back to that little wall with the bricks that I talked about. Right? It's not just be able to say, hey, I'm gonna put up a wall, but we actually have to think about like, okay, where am I gonna put that wall? Am I gonna put it on this side of the situation? Am I gonna put it on this side of the situation? And what I mean by this side of the situation, what I mean by that is, how close to the edge of what feels comfortable versus uncomfortable am I gonna put it? Like, am I gonna just put it right out there at that line? Or am I gonna put it like way, over here, so I've got some extra cushion and some extra kind of sense of comfort because I know that I've set that wall with more margin. I think it's also important to consider this little wall that we're talking about, these bricks, right? How high am I going to build it? Right? I'm going to establish the boundary, this idea of like, where am I going to put it, and how much am I going to be able to put this boundary that protects me from a person, a situation, some kind of relational context. So I think that the next thing we need to do after we've assessed and we've established, really important when we're talking about relational boundaries, is the need to communicate. It's really important for us, if we're going to set a boundary with somebody, that we actually have to communicate that boundary exists. So unlike we're talking about this analogy of the little wall that we're putting up with bricks, where we could, if that were the case, we could actually see it. It'd be pretty obvious to everyone, like, oh, there's Trevor over there. He's putting up his bricks again. He must not feel safe, right? But like in everyday interactions and in real life, right, there's not real bricks and there's not a real wall, right? So we have to be really clear with people to be able to say, hey, I'm setting a boundary with you. Okay, so what might examples like that be? Examples of relational boundary setting, something like, hey, I don't feel comfortable meeting you at this place without somebody else present. Okay, that would be like a relational boundary around space or environment. Like, I just don't really feel safe meeting you there, so unless somebody else is joining us. Or, I don't really feel safe having this conversation with you right now. Can we pick it up later? I don't really feel safe sharing from my heart on this particular issue. I'm just going to need some more time with this, and maybe we can circle back. All right, those might be ways in which we communicate a boundary with somebody. Okay, so after we've assessed and we've established and we've communicated, then we get to the fourth step in this. This is oftentimes the hardest and most challenging in all of what I've shared, is our ability to enforce. Like, not only have we said to somebody else, hey, I feel unsafe, or I feel uncomfortable, or I'm just not ready, or I just don't want to, or however we're going to verbalize to somebody the boundary that we're going to set, it's really important for us when they overstep that boundary, or they knock over the little wall that we've built, they've stepped onto the other side, and they've kind of like violated, like there's like blow the whistle, like, whoa, like throw the flag, like there's a foul on the play, right? It's important for us to be able to acknowledge that they have overstepped the boundary, and that we have to take responsibility to enforce the boundary. Why is this so hard? Because oftentimes, like, there's this sense or this feeling in us of like, oh no, it's going to turn into an argument, it's going to turn into conflict, it's going to result in some kind of misunderstanding, and ultimately it's going to kind of create some kind of distance. And sometimes it does. But that that is far less damaging than the alternative, which is to do nothing. Right? When we assess for a boundary, we establish a boundary, we communicate a boundary, and then we just let people like trample over it, knock it over, and show up on the other side of it, and we do nothing about it, oftentimes because we're worried or scared, we want to avoid any discomfort or conflict. Essentially what we're doing is we're telling those that we said, hey, it's not okay when you do these things, and then when they do them and we don't respond to it, we're in some way communicating to them like, hey, that it's okay. Even then, when we know on the inside, we're like, that's not okay. It's not okay that you overstepped this boundary. It's not okay that you are over here on this side of the little wall that I set up for us. And sometimes, again, we freeze in those moments. So again, this fourth step is to enforce. And I think it's really important that we enforce with grace. So here's an example of that. Like, we tell somebody, hey, that's just not something I'm ready to talk about. Maybe we can talk about it later. And that person keeps like pressing in, and they keep talking about it, and they keep bringing it up, and it keeps becoming more and more and kind of building pressure for us. And before we know it, we're lashing out or kind of responding or reacting in a way to their pushiness about a particular topic or subject, right? Now, in the midst of that, we have to kind of regulate ourselves, but we also have to be able to circle back with that person, be able to say, hey, remember we talked about this? Remember we discussed this? I shared with you that I wasn't ready to have this conversation, and yet you pressed it anyways. I'd really appreciate it if you would just honor what I shared with you. I still need some time to process this. I'm not ready to have this conversation. Let's pick it up later. Right? You can communicate that with assertiveness, but it's assertiveness without aggressiveness. Assertiveness to be able to say, hey, you overstepped the boundary. I'm not okay with that. I'm going to remind you that the boundary is there. And then we're going to revisit this when I'm ready, right? Because I was the one that had to set the boundary for us in the first place. Okay, so that what I just shared can also happen with, borrowing something, right? Like, maybe it's two siblings, and one sibling has set a boundary like, hey, I don't want you to be borrowing my clothes to the other sibling. And the other sibling does it anyways, like sneaks into their closet or to their dresser and grabs clothes. And, they see each other out at, whether it's at school or out in the community somewhere. And they're like, dude, what did you take that from my closet? What are you doing? Right? That would be a breaking of a boundary. So it would be important for the person whose clothes that is to be able to, with grace, to be able to say, hey, remember we talked about this? I don't appreciate it. That you would wear my clothes, especially without asking. Right? Maybe revisit. If you want to borrow something, please come and ask me first. And if I say yes, great. But if I say no, please honor and respect that boundary. Okay. We could go on and talk for a long time about boundaries, but I want to get to this other side of our discussion today, and it's around connection. So again, there are times when we feel like we need to protect ourselves. We need to put up our guard. But if that's the only posture we have in our relationships just don't go very far. They don't get very deep. Why? Because we've literally put these little bricks up between us and somebody else. So there's this incredible courage that it takes to take these bricks down one by one while assessing the risk, while asking ourselves about boundaries. But for us to be able to fulfill the other side of our longing in life, for connection, we have to be able to take these bricks down. And when we do, we're leaning in with a posture of connection. We're choosing to go from like this, right, to this. And when we do this, we when I mentioned it takes risk, it takes courage. Why does it take courage? Because it's the part of us that says, hey, I want to be known, and I want to be seen, and I want to be understood. It's the very vulnerable and raw and real part of us, this deep desire, again, to be seen, heard, and known. And that doesn't happen without incredible risk. So we take a deep breath, right? We start to take these little bricks off our wall, and we start to open up to a posture where it says, hey, I'm willing to be vulnerable and honest and real. As we do that, we're engaging with the person on the other side of this. We're assessing with them really this idea of what we call emotional safety. And we'll have more conversations about this stuff in the future, because this is a deep well that we could pull from, all of these things around boundaries and emotional safety and protection and connection, where today we're just kind of scratching the surface, again, with the mindset of knowing that we have to be able to hold on to both and learn to balance them well. Okay, so I know we're running out of time, so before we get to the end of this, I just want to give maybe a story and then just a couple strategies for finding balance. So I recently worked with a couple. One of the members of the couple, if I remember correctly, it was the husband. The husband didn't always feel safe expressing himself and sharing his emotions and his thoughts, and so oftentimes he would just shut down as a way that we kind of put up our little wall. The wife on the other side of that, she had this deep need for connection. She felt like her husband had kind of like emotionally kind of abandoned her, and she was just desperate to connect. And so this couple, I remember working with them, and they actually came up with this beautiful, simple, sustainable plan, which was this, that they were going to dedicate time every week. Like, they were going to put it on the calendar. They both knew when it was. They both knew exactly what was going to happen during that time. And it was once a week. They were going to sit down where they could have meaningful conversations with one another, like deep, kind of like below the surface conversations about their feelings, about their desires, their longings, their hopes. And here's what they found. They found when they actually put it on the calendar and when they actually gave structure around it, the husband actually started to feel more safe, because it was no longer spontaneous, it was no longer organic, it was no longer a sense of like he didn't know what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, but he actually could prepare himself to be able to share the things that he wanted to share, while the wife prepared herself and she was ready and receptive to hear those things. And equally beneficial to the wife, who had this longing for like, I just want to have meaningful conversations with my husband, that she knew she could look on the calendar, she could anticipate, she could prepare for that time where they were going to sit down together every week. And they've done this now for a couple weeks, and they're already starting to see some great benefits in their relationship, where they're able to switch from this idea of protection, and they're mutually moving together to a place of connection. Okay, so here's a couple strategies just before we wrap up. Strategy number 1 for finding balance. The first one is self-awareness. So regularly checking in with yourself to understand your comfort level and emotional responses. Before we interact with somebody else, it's important that we start with ourselves. If we're going to be able to build some kind of meaningful relationship with somebody else and assess those boundaries, we have to be able to say, hey, how are we doing? Understand our comfort level in the midst of that. Okay. Number 2 strategy is communication. So openly discuss boundaries and needs with the other person. It's vital, like super important for both protection and connection. Right, when I talked about that earlier, right? It's important that we communicate. Okay, number 3, I like this idea is what's called gradual exposure. It's the idea of just take little steps one at a time. So when I reference that idea of this wall and the bricks, think about those bricks, right? We can one step at a time, right? Slowly we can move those bricks around based on if we're feeling the need for protection or the desire for connection, like gradually move. So if we're moving towards protection, like slowly share more about yourself in a way that you're kind of testing and assessing. Because when it feels safe, you're able to build trust. So rather than this idea of like just doing it all at once, right? You're going to gradually expose yourself and be vulnerable and open and honest, assessing every step of the way. All right, and then the last one is this idea of like what we would call like therapeutic techniques. So use exercises like journaling, mindfulness, to understand your fears and desires in relationships, helping clarify when to protect and when to connect. So here's something I would actually challenge you to do mid-exercise, maybe today, tomorrow, like sometime in the next few days. So I want you to find somebody in your life, somebody you have some kind of connection with. So pair up with them, discuss a time that you felt that you had too much protection or too much connection in a relationship. And then explore, how did that impact the relationship? So you might have that person, if they haven't already watch this video, or at least just share with them the concepts of this video around this idea of protection and connection. And you're just going to explore with them. Like, hey, what's that been like, in a relationship where you've felt the need to protect yourself, or you have had this desire for connection? Maybe it's in the relationship, this person you're talking with. It's a spouse, it's a friend, it's a partner. It'd be really interesting for you to be able to explore that with them. Okay, so as we wrap up, again, this idea is how this fits into our mindset is when we interact with other people. Just hold this mindset that there is this co-occurrence that happens, right? This need to feel safe, this need for self-preservation and protection, and this need for like life-giving relationships, and this need for meaningful connection with other people in our lives. And the mindset is, it's important that we're not choosing one or the other, but rather we are constantly balancing between the two, right? And ideally we want to find our place in the middle, right? We are able to connect with other people in meaningful relationships in our lives while feeling safe in the midst of it. All right, as I mentioned, there's a whole lot more to unpack here, and we'll hopefully have the opportunity to do that in the future. It's great to be with you guys today. Just a quick reminder too, as I sign off, remember on Wednesday, Dr. Mike will be back for Wellness Wednesday. I'll be back for